I'm Reverend Kerri Parker, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Council of Churches, and I was the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Council of Churches at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. What you're about to see is a documentary we put together, a storytelling exercise, because we know that when crisis hits us, we are prone to forgetting the details very quickly on the other side. We wanted to make sure the important stories of the COVID pandemic weren't forgotten. The stories, the humanity, the lessons, the hard work that people did, that they put in caring for their neighbors, that the staff of the Wisconsin Council of Churches and our partners did to make sure that churches and neighborhood organizations and other faith-based organizations around the state and even beyond put in to make sure that people could gather safely, to care for their neighbors more safely, all made a difference for the sake of a healthier community, for the sake of the chance to gather on the other side of the worst of the pandemic. I'm really proud of the work that our team did. I'm really proud of the work that Wisconsinites did to care for their neighbors. And it's important to remember these stories. I hope you find them meaningful. I hope you're as proud of the people of Wisconsin as I am. Remember the stories, they matter.
Yeah, we lost those relationships, those opportunities to look at one another in the face, see what's going on with one another, give one another those gentle smiles, share the passing of the peace with one another. Yeah, we lost. We'll never get that back.
Unexpected was the closing down of everything. I mean, that was totally, unexpected. Go home, stay in your homes, and all that kind of chaotic.
We felt a bit like strangers in a strange land. We closed on the sale of our house on Friday, March 13th, 2020. And we moved into a building where we knew no one. And when Dane County put out we're closing schools, no meetings of more than 50 people, our new apartment management sent us our first communique, which said the community room is being locked, the exercise room is being locked. Do not share the elevators with anyone else. If someone's on the elevator when the door opens, don't get on. And outside visitors are not encouraged.
La pandemia nos agarró a todos por sorpresa. Primero, uno cae en ese estado de negación.
There was a great deal of skepticism in some circles in regards to the effect of the pandemic. There was a lot of what we term misinformation. There was just a lot of stuff that people didn't know. And so as a result, there was a lack of trust in certain circles regarding certain methods and certain procedures that were put in place to try and curtail the effects of the pandemic. And so that led to a lot of nervousness, discrepancies. I was one of the individuals who first caught COVID when it initially was discovered, and I went through all of the trials and tribulations of it, and then I emerged stronger. But at the time, I was in a place where we didn't have the necessary healthcare access, where we could get masks, where we could engage in social distancing, and there were people who were coming in and coming out, and they were engaging in society at large, and then ultimately the city of Madison, as well as pretty much the rest of the world, just completely and utterly shut down.
We were having our quarterly conference meeting that Saturday, March 14th, and I was the secretary taking notes. And we started the meeting, and Pastor said, "This will be our last gathering until further notice." It looked like she was fighting back tears as she was speaking. So we're there with the presiding elder, and I'm trying to take notes. And I said, "Okay, what's this about?" And she said, "Because of the illness," or what she calls it, the plague.
I had actually retired in January of 2020 when everything sort of changed basically in the middle of March of 2020. Suddenly, I realized that all of my public health colleagues who I had spent my whole career working with were overwhelmed and really needed help. So I just started volunteering to provide support to my colleagues and to provide support for some other folks who needed it. My focus was on the criminal legal system and the courts in particular, and then churches and other faith communities.
When I would go outside to go walking, I found that it was just very, very eerily quiet outside. I didn't even hear like the birds, the insects. It looked like the trees weren't sprouting. It just seemed like everything stopped.
I was what you call an essential worker. Yeah. You know, in those days, you had a little letter from Tony Evers at the very beginning of the thing. So if the police stopped you, I had my letter to prove I was legit.
I was laid off in my position, which was something that was a little bit shocking to have that happen.
Indudablemente cambió la manera de comunicarnos, ¿verdad? Eso es lo primero por lo cual fuimos afectados por prácticamente 2 años, estar limitados al no poder tener el contacto que nosotros estábamos acostumbrados a tener. Tal vez eso hizo que en algún momento algunos hermanos no sintieran la necesidad tal vez de estar en persona en el templo. Así que en el proceso tocó trabajar con algunos, muy pocos realmente, para como que recuperar, ¿no? esa separación física que tuvimos por tanto tiempo. Así que, bueno, por lo poco que llegué a escuchar en algún momento, fue el desafío que tuvieron otras iglesias también de mi organización, el poder recuperar, ¿no? a los hermanos, a la práctica regular de estar en el templo cada semana, porque algunas iglesias pues se fueron a transmisión online, ¿verdad? Para tratar de abarcar a todo el mundo, y dentro de ese espacio pues algunos hermanos se dieron cuenta que podían estar en casa sin necesidad de ir al templo, ¿verdad? Y escuchar el sermón del pastor. Así que eso fue algo positivo durante la pandemia, pero luego de la pandemia algunas iglesias tuvieron que batallar con eso, y probablemente algunas todavía estén con ese gran desafío, ¿no? De volver a recuperar todos los miembros de manera presencial.
I saw the split in the parish. I saw a group of people who were interested in worship. I saw a group of people who were interested in survival. And survival means money, and it means fundraising. How in the world do you raise funds during a pandemic when you can have no association?
What's crazy is in 7th grade, like, we had first heard about what COVID was when we was in science class, and my teacher, and he was just talking about it. Then, like, boom, like the next day we could not come up. It was like, it was a Friday. Called the group call with all my friends. And like, we was talking about it. It's like, dang, that's crazy. Like, we all still talk about it to this day. Like,
considering working 5 days a week at the Milwaukee Sewage District, we had work to do. And, wastewater doesn't die. You still have to flush. So that's why we were considered essential, and we did what we had to do. It was a lot easier going to work every day because the expressway was empty. And it was a lot easier to come home. You could get home a lot quicker.
And actually, when it was announced, we had just had a choir rehearsal, and I remember it so vividly because we were going to sing a song that Sunday for the very first time. And then we got the message that the church would be closed.
I remember taking a selfie with the people I led worship with for that last time and carrying boxes of our belongings out of the church, thinking, we don't know when we're going to be back here.
When we first heard about the pandemic getting close to home, it all seemed to happen very quickly. We had a campership brunch the weekend before. Our fellowship hall was full to the brim with people sharing a potluck-style meal and raising money for our kids to go to Bible camp in the summer. Very next weekend was the one where everything was shutting down very quickly.
Well, we introduced virtual worship, something that never had taken place before within this congregation, and that allowed us to continue the ministry in a virtual fashion throughout the COVID epidemic. So that was something new, and what emerged out of that is a hybrid type of service where now people either come in person or they participate virtually. And we found as a result of that, actually we had more people, more than the membership, actually participating in virtual worship.
One of the things with my youngest daughter, it was interesting. My youngest daughter, Zion, who during the pandemic was 15, 16 years old. Since she was 11 years old, she had been a youth activist here in the community. So very young, very prodigious in that sense, very much loving of her people, out here doing some things. And she also was very academically gifted as well. And the pandemic had a very interesting effect on her because in retrospect, it seems that the time away from her peers, the time away from the ability to directly engage in certain levels of organizing and activism, it really began to sap and really cut at her spirit.
O sea, es primera vez toda mi vida que, bueno, es una pandemia primera, yo creo que para muchos de nosotros, primera vez que experimentamos algo así, pero pues sí, tener que cerrar las iglesias los domingos. Nosotros también tenemos una escuela y daycares. En la escuela y el daycare estamos sirviendo a más de 350 niños pues de la comunidad y tuvimos que cerrar todo, la escuela, los servicios de los domingos, las diferentes actividades. Entonces esa fue la primera sorpresa, porque ahora cómo continuamos haciendo lo que estamos haciendo.
And so we had an emergency meeting of our church council. I'm pretty sure it was March 14th. And we made the decision that morning. It was not entirely unanimous, but it was pretty much consensus. We made the decision to suspend in-person services immediately. So we had to get the word out that we were suspending services for the following day. And we were the first church in Door County to do that. Most of the churches closed down, but it was another week before they did that. And I still remember also thinking that, we said we're going to do this for 4 weeks. 4 weeks would have put us back in the sanctuary for Easter. And I still remember thinking to myself, my gosh, did we kind of overreact to this? Are we going to be ready to come back into the building before 4 weeks? Is that, and so, that kind of anxiety, we were pretty quickly, we have a pretty good AV system in the church. So we were pretty quickly able to move into providing some services online. We wanted to live stream, but our internet service was not good enough to live stream. We didn't have enough bandwidth to do that. So what we ended up doing was recording the services and then sending links out to people so that they could watch it on their own time. And then as it got closer to Easter, I remember just this feeling of heaviness that, oh my gosh, we're not going to be in the church for Easter. what does that mean? And just the real heaviness about that.
Many people know that in the urban community, our children in the inner city usually are thought of last. They were trying to figure out what to do for the children during this thing called COVID.
The first weekend of shutdown during the pandemic, I was in Atlanta, Georgia at a church, Central Presbyterian Church downtown. And being in Atlanta, we had a lot of members who worked for the CDC. And so for weeks, if not a couple of months, I had some heads up that something was on the horizon that was going to be hard. I got a warning that we might be out of work or at home for 2+ years. And so months before most of the world shut down, I began helping purchase equipment for our church members and leaders to produce worship from home. I remember starting to talk with my staff about the idea that we might have to leave the office and not come back for months, and that we might be dealing with a 2-year challenge, and no one believed me. This was, information coming straight to me from the Centers for Disease Control, and yet people didn't believe it.
With the pandemic, that allowed us to really get to know one another, to embrace one another, and to build that relationship that we were all brothers and sisters. It didn't matter what color we were, it didn't matter how old we were, but we were all united. One church, one God.
People ask questions about what is communion? If you take communion from 100 houses across 2 cities, is it really communion? Or is it violating the essential nature of the sacrament to do it that way? We did share communion virtually through the miles and the digital airwaves because we thought that experience of connecting with God, connecting with the Spirit, connecting with each other was something that was vitally important, no matter whether we could be in the sanctuary or not. But theologically, people wrestled with that and what it meant.
I got bored of staying at home that I found out that one of my friends who's a pastor at a church on 9th and North Avenue, he never stopped. He kept it open, so I started going there.
A small group of us decided to get together and read the chapters in the Bible, any book that had 6 or fewer chapters. We did this on our own, for half hour by conference call. And it worked. We were committed to it, and we made the meetings on Wednesdays and so forth. I was happy about that and proud that we did it and committed ourselves to it. We just wanted something short and something that we could do on our own and wouldn't be anybody who was a pastor in charge. It would just be us ordinary lay people studying the Bible. So it did kind of help us. And then when we finished that, then we decided to continue because now we're hooked. So then we did Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, and we kept going. And then finally we were going to do the minor prophets. And I think we got through Amos before we started back having church regular Bible. So.
No diría que no nos faltó apoyo, diría al contrario. Ustedes fueron un recurso muy bueno para nosotros. Orienté a la iglesia, habían hermanos, ¿verdad?, que no querían vacunarse, por todos los comentarios, ¿verdad?, que se escuchaban a través de a veces hasta de las noticias y cosas por el estilo, y orientamos a las personas y ustedes llegaron al tiempo necesario y ellos participaron de las vacunaciones y hasta el sol de hoy, gracias a Dios, hemos estado bien por esa hermosa experiencia.
The first couple of months, it wasn't as bad because we have our group call. We'll be on it every day, till 5 a.m. or something like that. But yeah, that was a huge change, and a lot of things happened, bad things happening during that time. Other people died that I know, but one that hit me the most was my best friend. He had died. He had shot himself in an accident on that FaceTime call with me, and that really at that moment, I was scared. The screen was facing towards the ceiling. He was flashing up, put it down. Then he moved away from the screen. I just heard a shot. And I hung up because I was scared. I didn't know what was happening. At that moment, my friend just dad came in that group call and was like, Naquan died and stuff like that. I was at that because I was still scared about it. I was acting like I didn't know what happened. Yeah, that night, Like I stayed up till like at least 3 a.m. calling people. Like called one of my friends. She was already crying when I had called her. She was like, I say you closest to him. I know you heard this stuff like that. And I wasn't even crying at that moment. When I went to sleep, I woke up. I ran to the basement. My mom, she was on her phone, and I just like broke down. I just laid on there and started crying. I ain't. She had asked me as far. I ain't even tell me right away. Yeah, a lot of stuff happened, but I felt like at that moment it really built my character and made me like such a wise person.
It was definitely a spiritual thing. I have my wife is a very solid, introspective um, uh, Christian who keeps me grounded in because I spend so much time in my Christian expression in this active liberatory touch it, feel it, change it, hands on, that sometimes I have to learn to be still. And she was very good at helping keeping me grounded in that sense in terms of prayer, meditations, fasting, the things that bring back that more contemplative.
We did a lot of social emotional learning, but even with that, my kids I have now were the kids that were in K4 when COVID hit. So of course everything shut down. So that social piece that they really should have gotten in school, they missed all that.
I've always felt supported by my family in every situation, but I don't want that to go without saying, because I know that that's a blessing everyone doesn't have. But I do. I have 5 siblings, and they've provided lots of nieces and nephews, and even another generation of those. And so I'm always very supported by them.
I'm proud of the council for agreeing to figure out how to do this. You know, our tech guy, Dean Beckley, he said, you know, we've got the tech, let's make use of it. We debated for a while what's the right way. Should we do it one person alone here, or should we do it with a small team? We opted for the small team, spaced apart as much as we could. And we decided to do church as normal and had people in their regular places in this space. We had our worship team come, and they wore masks for a while as they played in a music group up here in front. But we just recorded ourselves doing it as usual. And that was one of the God sightings for our people. Once the governor's orders came through, we followed their order, and we never had more than a handful of people here. But people could watch from home and feel like they were here. They knew the space, they knew what they were watching, it had the same order and feel. We posted the bulletins on our website so they could feel like they were here. And I think being a traditional congregation where people were used to church and how to do church, it just instantly flipped for them. They went online. But the feedback I got from our people was shocking to me, because it felt so weird to preach to an empty house of God. People have said, it felt like you were preaching right to me.
And I remember a family who lost a loved one in the early days of the pandemic, unrelated to that disease, who said, you know, we can't gather right now. It's not safe. We can't lose someone else in the midst of our grief. Almost a year later, I was talking with members of this family, and we thought it's time. We don't yet have a vaccination, but it's time to gather and attend to this grief. And so the family offered ideas about what would be helpful to them to grieve well, and members of our staff and church took the time and the prayerful consideration to find a way to honor those things. Our music director found a way to coordinate with our organist such that they could play and sing together from the chancel and the vestibule of the church, so that they could make music together in the church, in the sanctuary, but keep each other safe and keep the family safe too. You could see the visible impact of this on the family and those people who are closest to the one they lost. That after so many months and such a difficult journey, frankly, in life, they were able to bring their loved one and their grief under the blessing of the community and articulate the promises of faith that their beloved was indeed in God's hand. Something they could sort of trust on their own, but something that's much harder to trust and digest when you're sitting alone in your kitchen with no one else around you. In our deepest moments of grief and loss, when we face death, the thing that is most helpful is the actual presence of another. That's what we believe. God sent Jesus, an actual person, raised an actual person right in front of us so that we could trust and believe that God's hope for our lives is real.
I think people need to know that the pandemic, though things will never be the same, that they can come back to the church. Or if they can't, for different reasons, they can still reach out to the church, because the church is still a church family, and we will be there, you know. And I say that as a missionary, I say that as a member. Like I said, we will be there.
Quizás el momento donde ya yo más me sentí conectado con Dios fue cuando yo mismo experimenté el coronavirus, porque hubo un momento en que ya después de que pasaron esos primeros 3 meses, ya más adelante cuando la iglesia regresó a una normalidad, ¿verdad? Entre comillas, ¿verdad? Una normalidad. Eventualmente yo me enfermé y hasta donde recuerdo fue porque nosotros aquí tenemos un ministerio que es una escuela de liderazgo. Bueno, son múltiples escuelas de crecimiento espiritual y equipamiento. Y una de ellas es una escuela de sanidad interior o sanidad espiritual integral que dura 24 semanas. Entonces, yo comencé a enseñar esta escuela, pero no era solamente para personas de nuestra congregación, sino que abrimos la oportunidad para que vinieran pastores y personas de otras congregaciones que quisieran, ¿verdad?, crecer en el área de lo que es la sanidad espiritual integral, ¿no? Trayendo temas de sanidad mental, sanidad emocional, sanidad interior, principios bíblicos de liberación, todo esto. Entonces, había un grupo grande, un grupo muy bueno de varias iglesias, incluyendo la nuestra, y el día de la graduación tuvimos que ir a un templo que nos prestaron, que era más grande, para poder graduar a todos los estudiantes. Entonces, como yo era el líder principal, el presidente de la escuela, pues obviamente allá al frente, a la hora de premiar a todos los estudiantes, dar sus reconocimientos, etcétera, pues claro que pasó todo el mundo y todo el mundo me saludó y yo tuve que utilizar algún micrófono que lamentablemente no estaba esterilizado. Entonces, yo sé que ahí fue que yo me enfermé por primera vez del coronavirus y entonces lo que sucedió fue que para ese momento yo no estaba tampoco vacunado, porque esto era todavía reciente, las vacunas no estaban todavía desarrolladas. Y, y entonces me enfermé y me dio duro. ¿En qué sentido? No me afectó mi parte respiratoria, pero sí me tumbó muy fuerte con fiebre. Mi fiebre duró 13 días. Entonces, 13 días con fiebre siempre es muy fuerte. Y era fiebre que subía a más de 106, 107 grados. Entonces, mi esposa estaba un poco asustada porque pues no me bajaba la fiebre. Varias veces me tuvieron que meter a una bañera con agua muy fría y ahí sufrí mucho, ¿no? Ese cambio con agua fría y al mismo tiempo temblando por toda la enfermedad que tenía. Entonces me afectó mucho, me daban picadas y dolores muy fuertes en los huesos y las coyunturas, como si me estuvieran clavando cuchillos. Entonces me dolía mucho, pero gracias a Dios no me afectó absolutamente nada de mi vía respiratoria, al punto que, o sea, ni siquiera tosí, tampoco tuve tos ni nada de eso. Solamente fue fiebre y dolor, como lo que le llaman la gripa rompehuesos, cuando te tumba, pero con mucha fiebre y escalofrío. Entonces, ¿qué sucedió? en aquel momento, como fueron muchos días, porque total a mí me duró 16 días, de los cuales 13 fueron con fiebre, alta fiebre, entonces yo, eh, en medio de sentirme tan enfermo, inclusive hubo un momento en que yo quería morirme, porque me dio tan duro que es como que yo deseaba la muerte. Es como que me quería ir porque sentía que no aguantaba más los dolores. Entonces, ahí, en esos días, tuve experiencias profundas con Dios en mi lecho de enfermedad, porque yo recuerdo que yo lloraba, eh, era como un mar de emociones, era como una montaña rusa de emociones, donde a veces estaba tranquilo, donde a veces lloraba mucho, donde me quejaba, donde tenía fiebre, donde dormía, donde a veces me desvelaba toda la noche. Entonces, tantos días estuve encerrado en la habitación que al final desinfectamos la habitación e intercambié con mi esposa y le dije que mejor ella se viniera a la habitación. Me fui yo para la sala, un colchón que tiramos ahí y ahí estuve el resto de la enfermedad como 6 días más. Entonces tuve momentos de oración profunda, de escuchar música, ¿verdad? Instrumental, de adoración, de leer mucho la Biblia, de conectarme con Dios de maneras que yo nunca antes me había conectado, porque yo he sido una persona saludable y yo nunca prácticamente me he enfermado, solamente alguna gripa por ahí. Entonces, experimentar eso, el hecho de no tener control de mi cuerpo, el hecho de no estar vacunado contra eso, el hecho de saber que mucha gente estaba muriendo, el hecho de saber que mi vida estaba en las manos de Dios y que yo podía resistirlo como yo podía enfermarme y podía morirme. Entonces eso me hizo vulnerable, pero esa vulnerabilidad fue buena porque, por ejemplo, ahí se cumplen las palabras del apóstol Pablo cuando dijo, ¿verdad? Dijo que él le dijo a Dios 3 veces, ¿verdad? Que le quitara el aguijón que él tenía en la carne, que se piensa que de pronto era alguna enfermedad en los ojos, que quedó como producto de su encuentro con el Señor Jesucristo cuando resucitó y se le apareció camino a Damasco. Entonces, él dice que Dios le dijo, mi poder se perfecciona en tu debilidad, bástate mi gracia, ¿no? Entonces, de alguna manera yo experimenté eso, experimenté el poder de Dios en mi debilidad. Es como que Dios me hizo una propuesta, ¿no? Y me dijo, entrégame todas tus libras y tus kilos de debilidades y enfermedades y yo te voy a entregar el peso de mi poder. Entonces, yo entendí que era un intercambio feliz y le dije, ok, Señor, te entrego todas estas libras que me pesan mucho de enfermedad y debilidad y ven con el peso de tu poder. Y en ese proceso, el peso de Dios bajó y yo sentí que el Señor vino, me terminó de sanar y experimenté a Dios de cerca, ¿no? Muy, muy de cerca. Y luego esto me ayudó también, luego a entender un poquito a las personas, ¿no? Cuando se siguieron enfermando del coronavirus y que yo tuve que ir a visitarles eventualmente o ir al hospital. Y ahí también entendí algo que dice el apóstol Pablo en Corintios, ¿no? Que dice que cuando nosotros pasamos por situaciones, por tribulaciones, por enfermedades, dice que en el proceso Dios nos consuela para que nosotros podamos consolar a otros con la misma consolación con la que fuimos consolados por Dios. O sea que en otras palabras, el final de la consolación ni siquiera es mi propia consolación, sino la consolación de los demás. Es decir, que Dios utiliza mi experiencia de debilidad y cuando Él trata conmigo y me consuela, ¿verdad? Y me alivia y me fortalece, ahora me manda como un mensajero, ¿verdad? Para ir a consolar a otros que están en situaciones similares o quizás peores, para que ellos experimenten la misma consolación con la que Dios me consoló a mí. Entonces me parece maravilloso, ¿no? Esa experiencia, porque ahí también se cumple la palabra del Señor, ¿no? Que es necesario que a través de muchas pruebas y sufrimientos podamos entrar al reino de los cielos, ¿no? Estamos aquí en este mundo, somos personas todos, absolutamente todos, por ser humanos, somos vulnerables, eh, somos, ¿verdad? Personas que a las cuales puede llegar la enfermedad, cosas inesperadas, pero ahí es cuando también actúa el poder de Dios en medio de circunstancias adversas.
I probably gained a little bit out of the experience, to look at it in a positive light. I spent more time with my kids. I actually paid attention to what they were learning, at least, what was going on from school when they had to do school from home. It slowed things down for me, but it also wasn't, the most ideal situation either.
I think the most interesting thing that we did for that Easter was for Ash Wednesday. Pastor Lisa and our worship director offered a drive-by imposition of ashes. And so they were there heavily masked, and we drove up heavily masked, rolled down the window, and she reached in the car window, driver's side, passenger side, back seat.
I was proud of the fact that our church was prepared. I was very proud of it. That it wasn't like all of a sudden we had to go purchase this equipment. It wasn't like we had to go and get some training on the equipment. I was very proud of the fact that we were prepared and we didn't miss a Sunday of church during COVID. Of course, not gathering in person, but we were able to videotape our worship experiences via one of the social media platforms. And so I was very, very proud of.
Bueno, al hablar de pandemia tenemos que hablar de muchas cosas, ¿no? Yo creo que todo fue inesperado. Una de las cosas que fue un impacto en mi ministerio es que para el momento de la pandemia yo tenía apenas unos meses de haber recibido una iglesia en el estado de Michigan como pastor. No estaba trabajando para ese entonces acá en Wisconsin. Y indudablemente fue un impacto porque lo que más queremos como pastores es precisamente tener todo el tiempo disponible para trabajar con nuestras congregaciones. No estábamos preparados para eso, así que fue un gran impacto el hecho de no poder reunirnos. Nuestra conferencia fue muy cuidadosa en ese aspecto. Nos dieron pues todas las instrucciones de parte del Departamento de Recursos Humanos, cuidando pues que alguno de nuestros miembros fuera a estar con problemas de salud con respecto a esto. Y bueno, nos tocó aprender a todos los pastores de mi conferencia, nos tocó sumergirnos en el mundo del Zoom, ¿verdad? Algo que para muchos fue un gran desafío, para otros tal vez no tanto, pero al principio fue muy desafiante para las iglesias, sobre todo porque los hispanos no estamos acostumbrados a estar reuniéndonos a través de una cámara. Sin embargo, aunque fue un desafío, gracias a Dios, pues pudimos sobrellevar durante todo ese tiempo de la pandemia esta situación de no poder reunirnos en persona, ¿verdad? Así que creo que fue el mismo challenge que tuvieron todos los pastores. Desafío, no todas las iglesias tal vez contaban con la tecnología para poder cubrir esa necesidad. Así que nos tocó correr literalmente para trabajar en medio de esa situación.
One thing that surprised me was that my grandparents and then my parents have had a vacation spot, a vacation home, in Oconto County. And I grew up going there for the first 2 weeks of August every year of my life. And then when my parents died, the kids inherited it. And we look forward to our time up there. But the taxpayers of Oconto County received letters saying, we know that there is a lot of COVID at your mailing address, and we are asking you not to come to Oconto County because we have little to none here, and we don't want that to change. And it surprised me that they could expect us to pay $5,000 of taxes and not step foot in our house.
What surprised me was people's unwillingness to take it seriously. People were dying all over the place, and others were like, well, I don't want my rights invaded, And I'm thinking, but this is about life and loss. So that surprised me that there were people who just didn't want to, believe.
There were a lot of things that were surprising and unexpected, although I think some of them, in retrospect, should have been expected. The way that science works and the way that medicine works and the way that public health works, in the sense that we're always learning. The more we know, then the more we see what we don't know, and then the more research we have to do to figure out the answers to the questions that we haven't yet answered. And here we had a respiratory virus that we sort of thought about how it spreads. We thought about how it spreads based on what we thought we knew about how other respiratory viruses spread. So, early in the pandemic, we focused a lot on hand washing and hand sanitizing and contaminated surfaces. And we focused a lot about droplets and droplet spread. And it took time to figure out that COVID was mainly airborne spread, these very fine, tiny particles that can stay in the air a long time and are highly infectious. That's something that is harder for the general public to wrap their heads around.
Well, one of the biggest challenges that we have, and I must admit that I am not an early adopter for a lot of things. I tend to view things with a high degree of skepticism. And those individuals who have been marginalized and those people who are disenfranchised, legal system impacted folks, those who are experiencing housing insecurity, they don't necessarily trust systems. So when you come to them and you say, this is a vaccine, and here's something that I don't think a lot of people recognize, that particular population or demographic, they possess a great deal of intelligence. And they recognize that the definition of the term vaccine had changed significantly. And, vaccine is I liken it to this. If you were to have a contract and you say you need to sign this contract in ink or the contract will no longer be valid, and someone hands you a pencil, they say, well, that's an ink pen. Well, and you sign that contract, then you don't have a valid contract because these two items have very specific definitions. And I say that vaccine had a very specific definition. It was something to prevent you from catching a disease or something that would prevent you from passing on. That was the basic definition of a vaccine. However, the COVID vaccines did not fit, that paradigm. So as a result, that was one of the major pushbacks that I got, is that these are not vaccines because they don't prevent it, nor do they stop you from passing it on to someone else. So I had to explain to them the evolution of that term and explain how the etymology of the words change over time to incorporate new meanings. So that was one of the significant pushbacks that we had. So to overcome the distrust aspect of it, I had to explain once again a compelling reason why an individual would be willing to take the vaccine. And the one thing I decided, I take solace in this, is that I made a decision that I would not encourage individuals to take the vaccine. Because when you encourage someone to engage in something that they're not comfortable doing, there is significant pushback. So instead, I didn't encourage you to take the vaccine. I just encourage individuals to recognize the ramifications if they did not take a vaccine. So that was one of the first important things that I believe was a breakthrough in addressing some of the reticence regarding the vaccine.
The confusion about the specific vaccines, the whole vaccination process. Frankly, being from Alabama, I'm familiar with the Tuskegee incident. And right away, intuitively, when the vaccine part came out, I said, no, I won't be doing it. Intuitively, no, I won't be vaccinated. Family and friends were neutral at the time. Some were strongly going along with whatever the media said to. And of course, we had a lot of leadership, get the shots. But I remained independent, making my own thoughts about it. I didn't take it lightly not doing the vaccine, but I prayed a lot.
Throughout my life, I've had the support of a woman named Sister Mary Painter. She was my professor at Edgewood College, and she was my mentor. And at the time, she was 90 years old. And she was living in Cincinnati, the convent or the nunnery in Platteville, right down by Platteville. And I wanted to visit her. I wanted to see her. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to let her know that she was important to me and she meant so much. However, because of her age, it would be completely untenable for me to make contact with her without being vaccinated. And I'm going to tell you straight up, I was in the United States Marine Corps. When I went through the line, the individuals who were responsible for giving us our shots, they were sort of a macabre group, as they used those pneumatic needles to cut our arms open. And ever since then, I have been extraordinarily afraid, if you will, of needles, all needles. I sometimes pass out. I will admit that here today. So there was no way I was going to take a shot. But it hit me that I had a choice, not take a shot, and as a consequence, not see a woman who I love with all my heart, or take a shot and bask in her glory and in her arms. And that was a real easy choice for me. And once that hit me, I recognized that people who were experiencing reticence about vaccines, it wasn't about us. It was about those that we loved.
Just early on, with all the many pieces of information about the pandemic, I made the personal decision to always follow the CDC guidelines. So I was very aware of them. I followed them, and I applied them to every situation in my life. When we started meeting again, I was very clear that the only way that I would agree to meeting or I would come to a meeting would be if it followed the CDC guidelines. And that, I think, was frustrating. And I think there were people in the meeting who didn't share that belief. And there were also many people who didn't have a fixed belief, I don't think, about the pandemic or their responsibility or the CDC, who just sort of did what they felt like in the moment. And I was not very good at accepting that because I felt like we needed to follow the guidelines exactly as the DC set them up. So there were different times where we met outside, where we met inside 6 feet apart. But masks were a real challenge for some people. I think they found them uncomfortable, difficult to wear, hard to talk. So often people were taking off their mask, even though we'd agreed to guidelines. Some people just came without a mask. Some people didn't. Some people wore it the whole time. Some people took them off. I felt like I often was reminding people what we had agreed to, and I feel like I just kind of burned out at that time.
One of the many important lessons I learned from that was by watching an interview on a local TV news program. The reporter had found some Milwaukee resident to interview, who said, look, I understand what the health department is doing, but they need to understand that when they close a school, that means my kid has to stay home. And when my kid has to stay home, That means I have to stay home. That means I can't go to work. That means I'm not going to get paid. And that means I'm not going to be able to make my rent. And it was so powerful to me. But this woman put this in such plain, straightforward, and stark terms, and it just always stuck with me. And so I think, I think my public health colleagues also appreciate that. And so when it came to the COVID pandemic and we put out orders to close, non-essential activities, we did not do that lightly. For public health, we try very hard to manage communicable disease as lightly as possible with the least amount of adverse impact as possible. And I appreciate that a lot of people couldn't go to work because non-essential businesses were closed and they weren't getting paid and they were having trouble making their rent and schools were closed and kids got behind in learning. There's some real serious things that happen. I just what I would like to say is that your local health departments and your state health department, these are public servants who are not doing their job in order to get rich, because nobody gets rich in public health. They're doing their job because it's a professional calling, a moral calling. They're really doing their best to try to keep people healthy and safe, and that in the case of an outbreak or a pandemic, to minimize death and disability.
También había mucho miedo y además teníamos mucha prudencia. Y ha sido difícil recuperar el terreno y la gente perdida a pesar de todos los esfuerzos y las estrategias y actividades que hemos llevado adelante. En el caso de la Iglesia Santa Fe, bendito sea Dios, en los últimos meses hemos tenido un repunte importante en la asistencia. Hemos vuelto, a ver las bancas ocupadas y hemos vuelto con el deseo de mostrar o de focalizar nuestro mensaje con más palabras de aliento y con menos fuerza apocalíptica y devastadora. O sea, no estamos usando el mensaje de Cristo viene a aniquilarnos a todos, sino Cristo nos acompañó y nos sigue acompañando en todo este tiempo.
When I served as a pastor in the church in Atlanta, we had a lot of resources at our fingertips. The Centers for Disease Control, church members worked there. We had hospice chaplains, we had doctors, nurses. People were getting rubrics for institutional life from their workplaces. And they would share those with me as a pastor and with our session. But they weren't one-for-one applicable in the life of a church. And so I began scanning, and our church members began scanning for church leaders who were doing this work. And we found the Wisconsin Council of Churches work on living together during COVID and then eventually re-entering community life safely. And so those were a godsend because our church inherently trusted the information that we were receiving from our healthcare professionals and infectious disease professionals. But the application that the Wisconsin Council of Churches provided was huge for us. The pandemic has shaped my understanding of church and my experience of church in ways that I think will last the rest of my life and time in ministry. For several years, we got into habits of engaging with each other in dispersed ways. And some of those were really meaningful and helpful in the moment. Some of them were just coping mechanisms. And yet, all of those habits about how to be church in a dispersed fashion set the stage for what I think our current reality of church is. And I actually don't think that was unique to the pandemic, but the pandemic accelerated a trend that was already ongoing in our lives. that because of the reality of America, our social and economic lives, our family structures, our engagement with church has become more dispersed. And so the pandemic accelerated this reality, emphasized it, concretized behaviors and patterns of community life that supported it. And so now, as a church leader, I'm thinking out loud all the time with other people about how are we to be church when people aren't going to all gather in one place ever. Every Sunday, the community gathers, but it is an increasingly smaller portion of the larger community that gathers in person in the same physical space at the same time for the same purpose. That doesn't mean we aren't a cohesive community, but it requires different kinds of work to remain and to build a cohesive community. It requires a lot more one-on-one outreach by phone, text, lunches, what have you. It requires a lot more creative use of technology to keep people who are not in the room connected with those who are. It requires, I think, more jubilant celebration of milestones in life that inherently bring people together in places and times where they want to celebrate with others in person. And I think it requires letting go of some of our expectations of what church used to be, such that we don't try to seek after something that's gone. And that's hard to parse out what's essential, what will come back, what doesn't need to come back. But that will be the work of a generation, I think, for years to come. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of that work. It's challenging, but it does push us to be creative and to really pause in front of the people and the reality that we're in, and not simply do what we've always done because that's the roadmap to follow.
First of all, I would say in the church itself overall, I think the pandemic really helped to make our community and the larger body of Christ more aware of some realities that were already occurring over the past 10 to 15 years. And that is the fact that that we had entered this period of the end of what they refer to as Christendom, where Christianity itself was going to always be the overarching meta-narrative and foundational element of our society.
The push to go forward was, I think, intensified by COVID. I think that's fair to say. I'm not sure everyone sitting in a pew has really thought that through, but having done a worship renovation at St. Paul's in Kenosha before coming here, I think that the commitment that we bought little pieces quicker and along the way. First, we bought the central camera that could be the one camera to record through the soundboard and the system in the house. Then we bought the 3 cameras. Then we bid off the sanctuary space to make sure we could light it and it would function better. I think that, yes, that ended up becoming something that we did, again, to continue to meet the needs of people where they're at. But most of our people have figured out how to find us on our YouTube page and can watch and feel like they're here. And one of them that lives in Muskego, I visit her about every month. Every time I come, she tells me how thankful she is for the tech in the space, that she can hear clearly, she can see clearly. And for someone who came every week of her life, she can still be here on Sunday, even though her physical limitations mean she can't leave the house. That's a God moment.
I remember people saying, this is going to be a long process of regathering. We're going to take steps very carefully and cautiously, and we're going to evaluate all along the way to decide, is this going well? Are we keeping people safe? Do we need to change gears based on how the disease is spreading differently, in each season? One of the first things we did was gather outside for worship and fellowship. I remember that being incredibly hard. The muscle memory of how to do worship again had been lost for a long time. And we all had to figure out, who's going to move the chairs? Oh yeah, we need bulletins. Who's going to play music? Can we play music even outside? Maybe not. Should there be drums or horns, voices? And so it's just incredible amounts of thought and work. But when we finally started doing the thing together, it was really life-giving. I remember me and a lot of other people just weeping in the midst and after, that we could hear someone else's voice singing near ours, that we could hear someone praying over us right in front of us, that we could be in a space, albeit outside, with 100 people and see children running and see elderly people in their lawn chairs and look out at the sky together and simply be in the same place. And for a long time, that carried us, I think. It was hard work, but the gift of simply being in each other's presence was enough to make that worth it.
I'm most proud of the fact that I know I saved lives. And I saved lives on behalf of Justine and on behalf of the Wisconsin Council of Churches. I am most proud of the fact that there's an organization, the Wisconsin Council of Churches, that actually did measurable good.
I can say one thing that made me proud is I had learned to braid my hair. I had needed my hair done. I think I was bored too. I needed something to do. And then so, like everybody else, I was just watching videos online. And I had ordered this hair off of Amazon. And I was like, let me see if I could braid my hair. I really didn't braid it. It was just like I had to braid at the root and then twist down. But I never did that before.
People have different perspectives of how their worship experience is going to be with Almighty God. And we can't just put people in a box. It can't just be what Reverend Jerry wants it to be. Oh, I love the church to be filled up with people, us clapping and praising and singing. Oh, I love that. That may not work for everyone. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think where the bad thing is if we don't fellowship together. So necessarily the fellowship doesn't have to be on Sunday mornings. Hey, why can't we fellowship on Tuesday? Does it have to be in this building? We can go someplace else and we can all be together as brothers and sisters in Christ and conduct ourselves in a manner that's glorifying to God. But I just think we're getting to this place, where, maybe these large edifices, maybe that's not going to be what's going to be prominent in the future. But the bride of Christ is going to be all right.